Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Autism Stories. I'm your host, Doug Bletcher, the founder of Autism Personal Coach. Autistic people are the true experts of the autistic experience, and Autism Stories is where we interview autistic people to learn from their diverse stories, experiences, and get their insights. If you would like to be notified about each week's episode of Autism Stories, we suggest you subscribe on your favorite podcast listening platform. Now, we're going to do something a little bit different here on Autism Stories for this episode. You may or may not have realized, but in the last year, we have improved our audio quality thanks to the editor of Autism Stories, Anthony. So we're trying something new, and that is remastering some of the old episodes that you might have missed that really resonated with the Autism Stories audience. Therefore, enjoy today's remastered episode with Dr. Mel Hauser for the first time, or listen again for some wonderful insight from Mel. We hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Well, Mel, I want to thank you so much for joining me today here on Autism Stories.
Absolutely. That was great to be here.
I wanted to start off like I do with so many of our guests and learn about your story. Where in the autistic community does your story begin?
Well, I think like many lead identified adults, I received my autism diagnosis in the context of autistic burnout. And ironically, the day I received my diagnosis was the 2-year anniversary of my child's diagnosis, like to the day. And so I would say that my story probably, I should say, it really began when I became a parent 6 years ago, where here I was, a family doctor taking care of babies through older adults, but like I had a background in child development. That was my thing. So like I thought I knew what I was doing, but my baby had other perceptions. Like she made it clear in no uncertain terms that our environment was not a match for her needs, and that turns out like all my Medicaid training was in fact useless, which symbolically, like we know that healthcare providers training is really an outdated paradigm of what autistic people really need. And so it was my journey toward a new way of being in the world, let alone discovering my own brain, was thanks to my now 5-year-old.
Now, you're a doctor and you've created a wonderful nonprofit, All Brains Belong VT, that uses universal design principles to help neurodivergent people access proper health care. So prior to starting your nonprofit, what were some of these barriers you saw in helping neurodivergent patients to get the care that they need?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Even when I was in general primary care practice, I was spending most of my time helping neurodivergent patients problem solve life outside the exam room. So accessing what they needed in education, accessing employment that met their needs, making friends, like all of the things that the healthcare system largely designates as separate from health. And it always just like made no sense to, because health is all of these different things. And when we think about, the so many defaults in society, in healthcare, in school, in employment, and like social culture, like they're just not designed with our needs in mind, and therefore are barriers to access are everywhere. And I think that this has a profoundly harmful impact on health. But like there was this one critical day I should mention. I went to pick up my then 4-year-old from preschool, and I saw her literally on the perimeter of the playground, like backed into the corner, like on the side. Like I was just like, this is symbolically just showing me that like no, this is not the world she's going to grow up in. And then thereafter, I learned for the first time that the average life expectancy of an autistic adult was 36 to 54 years of age, and I was 37. And like really, I flipped my lid. I quit my job, and I just felt this like profound urgency to do something to just shift all of it, so that, Luna could grow up in a world that was different from this one, and shift the whole, like, zooming way out, like the whole big picture, the whole community conversation on neurodiversity and inclusion just seemed like a complete rehaul.
Now, I've known many people who've wanted to start their own nonprofit, but it was, just too overwhelming of a process, and the nonprofit never really got created. I think there's a lot of great ideas out there. So I think much of this is kind of relating to executive functioning. What was kind of your experience with this in creating All Brains Belong VT?
I really want to thank you for this question. Like, nobody's ever asked me that. And in full transparency, not only has this been hard, it's still hard. Every day is hard. And I don't really name that. And I try to just be authentic whenever I talk about this, with anyone who I know well or people I'm just meeting for the first time, because I think that why not? Like, let's just be authentic and real. Because I think, with my patient, there's this myth that other people really have it all together. And I'm just going to come right and say it. I don't have it all together. This is really hard. But the best way I can answer your question is, I think that all of my many layers of privilege, one of these layers is that I actually understand my brain and my access. I have, like, that's like a fundamental premise that most people don't have access to understand their access needs. Like, that's like from the ground up. Like, if you don't know what your needs are, how can you design a life based on them? And when you've grown up being told that, like, your needs don't matter, and in fact, like, there's something wrong with you for having needs, like, that's the first hurdle, right? And so, yes, all right. So I understand my brain, my access needs, but the other part of privilege is that because I'm a healthcare provider who was already, even before starting this organization, already focusing on supporting neurodivergent kids and adults and usually multi-generational families, I knew how to get help when I was struggling. So that's a whole other layer of privilege that most people don't have. And by quitting my job and breaking out of the restrictive way of practicing care, the other layer of privilege is autonomy. I have autonomy to meet my own access. Like, all three of those buckets, if you don't have those, it's so, so, so hard, because the executive functioning load is intense. I had this autonomy to structure all the containers I needed, and I still, last week was our 1 year anniversary. I shift those containers regularly because one of my access needs is novelty. I have a team. I worked as a volunteer doctor for the first 4 months, and then over time hired part-time staff who, like, wanted to join in the movement in this big picture of completely reimagining some of the major structures of society. But, like, the day-to-day life is all about co-regulation with that team, and we really have a culture of interdependence here, where we're all supporting one another to meet all of our access needs, like, individually and collectively.
You're talking about autonomy. That's probably my favorite word in the English language. And I'm just wondering, that is definitely a privilege that people have when they have autonomy. How much do you see like being a medical doctor as part of your autonomy?
I would say that, there's a lot of people within the healthcare system who recognize that there's so much that's wrong with it. But in my experience, it's hard to balance autonomy, and if you have a vision of equity, which I do, it's really important to me that people can access it. So, like, I couldn't just, like, start a private practice and take cash, because, like, there's gonna a split between people who get to access that and people who don't. So most of my patients have Medicaid and Medicare. We take most commercial insurances too, but most of our people, have Medicaid and Medicare. And I built the autonomy piece is that my profession is a profession that can bill health insurance. I am so grateful for that privilege, because that's what affords me autonomy to do my work, is that there's another way that people can access it. So for our healthcare programs, we bill health insurance. For our community programs, They're all free. And that's the model that I wanted. It's like what I need to feel fulfilled in my world. And so the only way that that's possible is because I can bill health insurance for the healthcare programs. And that, thank goodness, the message has really resonated with the community in terms of all our community programs are funded by, the generosity of, philanthropic support from community members. And that's how we get things done here.
Now, not far behind on my list of favorite words or phrases behind autonomy is universal design. Universal design principles, I think, are so critical because they truly help everyone. So, you started All Brains Belong VT that uses these principles for healthcare and community connection. How do you use universal design in relation to healthcare?
So when I think about universal design, when I'm describing this to people who have never really kind of thought about it before, when I think about just not having any defaults. So everything we do, we offer in multiple different ways with the idea that if you give people multiple flexible options for engagement, you are honoring their autonomy to pick and choose what works best for them. And so, because when I think about it, anytime you have a default, anyone whose brain learns, thinks, processes, communicates differently than that default is always going to feel other. And when we launched, the message that I try to always focus on is that of inclusion. And anytime you are going to other people for not functioning in the default way, they're going to feel other. They're not going to feel included. And so the idea with universal design is just not having any defaults, offering a menu to all people. And so in healthcare, you're picking your setting, you're picking your furniture, you're picking your lighting, you're picking your, a range of sensory and executive functioning communication supports. And we offer this to all the patients, not just people who are, identifying it, as having disability and requesting accommodations. But we do that also. But this is everyone. We have patients here who wouldn't necessarily identify as neurodivergent. They come here because they like autonomy and flexibility. Because, as you said, it benefits everyone.
One aspect of healthcare is getting vaccinations, and that's definitely been an increase due to COVID and all of the vaccinations from this time period. So, from what I understand, your nonprofit developed a model to make sure these vaccinations are neuro inclusive. I'd love to learn more about that model.
Totally. 1 week before we launched last year, a lot of this is like chasing dopamine. I was like, wouldn't it be really cool to create a free program to teach all the people what we do and just make it available for free? And so we literally did this before we even opened. And it was really taking our menu of universal design for healthcare and applying it to vaccination. Because there are so many people who can't access vaccination because it's simply too stressful, and it's not an optional kind of stress that you can just suck it up and push through. It's not optional. It's not accessible because you don't feel safe, and if you don't feel safe, you can't do the thing. What this looks like is everybody, not just people again who are identifying as having a disability and requesting accommodations, a menu for everybody. You pick your setting, inside, outside, or in your car, and a menu for what happens before, during, after. How do you want to receive information? Kinds of sensory supports do you need? Even, there's a section where we ask, what do you love? So, for example, if there's a kid who loves dragons, we're gonna have, a dragon video playing as they walk in the door, and a dragon song playing, because it's not just, it's not distracting them. It's actually giving them dopamine. When your monotropic focus is dragons and the dragons are there, it's actually going to impact your sensory processing. Things are going to hurt less when you have dopamine.
So I mean, it's very exciting to hear you talk about this, hear a doctor talk about these things. I'm curious, like in your local community, what's been the feedback? Have you heard much feedback from the medical community in terms of what you're doing?
Yeah, I think that most healthcare providers have never thought about this before. And so I think about the brain science of advocacy, of social justice. It's kind of it's fairly predictable that when you tell people they're doing it wrong, they flip their lids. So that's why I come at this from a lens of inclusion, of like, did you know that there's not a default brain? Like, I mean, that's like new information based on the paradigm that most medical professionals are trained in. And so, through that lens, the reception's been really positive. And, we train, you mentioned the model for universal Zen for vaccination. We train other healthcare practices in that, because like it's in healthcare, like so many systems, there's so many like assumptions that they're just wrong. I call them brain rules. Like they're not world rules, but like the brain rules, like as a medical student, I was literally told it is normal for kids to cry during healthcare appointments. And that always viscerally felt gross to me. And I just like never bought it. But that's like literally what is thought about in so many places. It's like, did you know you can actually create a positive healthcare experience and not traumatize the sweet little loves? Like, I mean, that's new information for a lot of people. And we think about adults, so in my practice, yeah, some of the people who come here, they know they're neurodivergent or they're wondering if they're neurodivergent. But a lot of the people who come here, they come because their needs were not met by the traditional healthcare model. And so they come here because they're suffering. Their health is suffering and no one's been able to help them. And no one has kind of like, there's so much healthcare trauma, where people are just invalidated and dismissed and they don't feel safe to like really describe in the way that works for them what's going on. And when they have that experience, it's fairly easy to identify what's going on. And often that's the pathway that they discover about their brains is through the context of their multi-organ system, like neuroimmune stuff like hypermobility and dysautonomia and some of the really common conditions in autistic adults.
So healthcare kind of starts when we come into the world, when we're born. So, and you mentioned a little bit earlier, you, in addition to being a doctor, you're a parent. So I'm wondering, kind of like looking back from maybe that lens, how do you view medical school and medical training? And maybe what do you wish they would have taught you?
I mean, it needs a whole rehaul. It needs a total rehaul. I was trained in this very deficit-based paradigm of really, really stigmatized narrative. And that's how most medical doctors are trained. And, it's interesting. A couple weeks ago, I did a training for mental health therapists and on neurocultural competency. And I said to my 5-year-old, I'm like, hey, what should I tell them? I'm doing another neurocultural competency training. And the 5-year-old says, tell them there's no right way to be a person. That's my baby. That's my baby who has known about her brain since she's 2 and has grown up in a neurodiversity affirming household. So that's how I'd answer your question. I wish that medical education delivered the message that there's no right way to be a person because we are trained in, there's one default set of development. It's linear. This is the correct way to do it. And anything else is bad and needs to be cured, fixed. I mean, it's offensive. All of it.
So healthcare to me is about the quality of life. Hopefully, we're going to be living into our 70s and 80s. But you were talking about earlier about life expectancy for us in the autistic community isn't very good, and that living to that age doesn't far too often doesn't happen. So I know one of the biggest causes of this is cardiovascular disease. So what do you see doctors' role in starting to reduce this as a leading cause of death for so far too often for autistics?
Yeah, I mean, if I were going to pick one thing that needs to be completely rehauled, the healthcare system's narrative of autism is itself a barrier to healthcare. How I was trained in that deficit-based lens and like was not trained, but the DSM-5 criteria for autism, those are autistic stress behaviors. Like that's what those the stereotypes are. It's wouldn't it be really great if we could figure out that people can understand their true authentic selves and their access needs without reaching such levels of profound dysregulation. So like that's how I would say that. And because of that really stigmatizing narrative, I think the lens that healthcare providers are viewing their patients, I think really matters. When someone views a person through a deficit-based lens, I don't know, I could walk into a room, I can feel the vibe of someone viewing me through a deficit-based lens. And like right there, I feel safe. And so many people have that experienced. So there's like and even when you think about the research on the barriers to healthcare access, and one of the studies I can send it to you that was very instructive to me in designing my model here at All Brains Belong was Darty et al. In 2021 surveyed primary care patients on what are your barriers to accessing healthcare, and they broke this up into three buckets of things in the environment, things in the system, like the provider, things with the provider, including like attitudes and communication. So provider attitudes and knowledge are inadequate. And so when you mentioned cardiovascular disease, I mean, there's no trading on autistic physiology. Like it's not thought about that we actually have different physiology in my practice. And I knew about some of this because I was mostly caring for neurodivergent patients in my general practice. I knew about a lot of the common associations, hypermobility spectrum disorders, or either Stanley's dysautonomia, migraine, short-term sleep apnea. These things are common, and it's known that autistic people that we have more of these things. But until I had a practice that was almost all neurodivergent people, I didn't really get it. That when you really zoom out, there's a big constellation. So 70% of my patients have long COVID or long COVID-like conditions. So people come here because their needs were not being met in other settings. And what those people all have in common is that they have multi-organ system, connective tissue, including, blood vessel differences. So when you talk about cardiovascular disease, if you don't know that, and I didn't know that, I think given that premature cardiovascular disease is one of the leading causes of death for autistic people, we have to look at that. We have to talk about that. And in fact, one of the things one of our community projects that All Brains Belong is doing, and we're raising money to produce free educational materials, as we're doing this for our own community. But I want this to just be free and on the website. Of like, how do you manage this stuff? Like we're treating long COVID all day long here. We're like learning a whole lot of things that are actually work.
I'm fascinated to hear that because actually earlier today I supported someone going to a medical appointment who's had an autistic woman who's had long COVID for a year and a half, and she really hasn't been given any answers to like what's going on. They had her go through some testing, but the testing didn't really show anything abnormal. So, like, what's been your experience in working with neurodivergent patients who have long COVID?
Yeah, and I think the first and foremost, it's to recognize that a lot of people, medical people, believe that long COVID is not like a new thing. It's a bigger picture of autoimmune disease that's kicked off by COVID. So autoimmune disease is commonly triggered by any assault to your immune system, whether that be infection, surgery, pregnancy, concussion. There's like a whole list of things. So a lot of the people here who have this, they had like brewing low levels of this, and then they got COVID. And then, so it's about like, I don't like when I see all over, like yesterday, somebody sent me this 88-page like federal document about long COVID management. 88 pages, literally not one strategy for management. 88 pages, all it does is just talk about how long COVID's really bad and how like we really need like treatment and research. I'm like, dude, I'm like doing this like right now. It's like happening right now. We're just doing it. So medicine is so fragmented and so siloed that of course it would look like it's its own thing, but it's like zooming out and learning from multiple different perspectives. So like ADB has what we call ourselves. So All Brains Belong has an interdisciplinary task force, multiple specialties, physicians, physical therapists, occupational therapists, various integrative medicine practitioners, complementary alternative healers to really be, all right, let's put everything together and look at, okay, so we know that each part of this construct has some identified strategies, but some of those strategies actually make the other parts of the big picture worse. So, for example, if somebody has chronic pain and they get put on a muscle relaxant, if you didn't know that they also had sleep apnea, well, now you made their connective tissue floppier, and so their airway collapsed more, and so their oxygen levels dropped more, which made their dysautonomia worse, which made their pain worse. And so, like, you have to zoom out and treat the whole thing. The lens that we have found most helpful here is learning everything we can about mast cell activation. And it's known that autistic people have more mast cell activation or mast cell dysfunction, whether you have that diagnosis or not. And so that's how we treat long COVID, is through that lens. And a lot of these treatments are like over the counter medicines and supplements. We may, in fact, be making this more complicated. Really, I think that there's so much unlearning to do. More is not more. Fancier and more expensive is not better. And I think the other thing that we're really learning from and is like the model here is really that of a community village. It's a village of like everybody here has this. I have this. We're all just learning and healing together. And that's like pooling really elevating the experience of autistic people. Yeah, this is what I'm experiencing. This is what I've tried. This is what's worked. This is what made things worse. And, zooming way out and saying, okay, there's some patterns here. And using the natural strengths of autistic brains to spot those patterns and learn from them.
Now, you're just talking about community village, which I think is so critical. Community is, I think, essential in building programs that are inclusive enough so autistic and neurodivergent folks can get their cardiovascular needs met. What do you see as doctors and hospitals' responsibilities in working with communities and helping to build these programs? Because doctors can't do it and hospitals just by themselves.
Yeah, I think that it's really about recognizing the limitations and like saying, I don't know. There are so many patients who have been told, okay, well, good news, your testing is normal. And you're like, that doesn't help like literally at all because I'm suffering. Right. That's like, I wonder if that kind of played out in the visit you supported today. But like just it's okay to say I don't know, and I'm gonna try to learn. I told my patients all year, I have no idea how to treat long COVID, but I'm gonna learn with you. And that's what we've been doing together. And I think there is also this when you recognize many of the components of long COVID have to do with the autonomic nervous system or the automatic nervous system functions, like that blood pressure, heart rate, body temperature, automatic things, and the immune system. And so when you think about the nervous system and the immune system, what they communicate to each other, but what they have in common is they're trying to keep us safe. And what we're finding is that so many neurodivergent people are in environments that are not safe physically, emotionally, like all socially. You just like when your environment is not affording you access, it feels terrible and it directly harms your health. And so much of this is about, and again, this is privilege, wherever one can, saying no to unsafe environments. And again, that intersects so much with your autonomy question earlier. And it's so hard. And there are environments where, okay, you can't just like quit your job. You like have to just like you need money to live. And when you also think about the multiple different ways in which human beings are othered, and when you think about gender and sexuality, divergence and race and ethnicity and like all of the things, you're going to be more likely to be dysregulated. Because how could you not be? You're being actively harmed. So the more different ways you're being harmed, the more dysregulated you're going to be.
And yeah, I have one last question. Beyond this interview, I'm sure people are going to want to learn how they could maybe get in contact with you. How can they learn about you and All Brains Belong?
Sure, we'd love for your listeners to connect with our community. All of our community programs are free. So if you go to allbrainsbelong.org, and you click community, you'll see community programs. And so, like, I think the most fun for adults is Brain Club on Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern. It's a weekly community conversation on like everyday brain life stuff. Like last night was on neuro-inclusive employment. And they're all recorded if you can't make it live. And the past year's worth of archives are all available for free. So, speaking of executive functioning, I often forget that social media exists, but we have social media accounts. I'd say that probably Instagram and Facebook are our most active, and so we'd love to connect with you there. And we have a whole campaign now, reimagining what's possible with some like free events that go along with that to just get the word out. Like we have a virtual New Year's Eve. It's by donation only, so you can drink for free with music and a cartoonist and a spring club. Anyway, so it's so we'd love for people to connect.
Well, I think you've convinced me that I need to move to Vermont.
But all the community programs are virtual. You don't even have to move here.
That's wonderful.
Free from where you are.
Yes, absolutely. I will definitely be checking them out. So, Mel, I really appreciate your time and thanks so much for having this important conversation with me.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much to Dr. Hauser for the conversation. To learn more about Dr. Hauser and All Brains Belong VT, please check out the link in the podcast description for this episode. So, this is the part of the episode where I get to tell you about Autism Personal Coach and how we can be helpful in your life. Did you know that Autism Personal Coach provides extraordinary support to live self sufficient and purpose driven lives through our customized coaching? If this is something that you're interested in learning more about, please visit autismpersonalcoach.com for more information. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Autism Stories. And if you did, if you could tell a friend, foe, or anyone you know about it so they could have the same enjoyable and educational experience as you when listening to Autism Stories, it would be very much appreciated. Until next time, I'm Doug Bletcher of Autism Personal Coach. Talk to you then.